broadcasting live 4 days a week worldwide
from the sunny beaches of Southern California.
This is ExtremeHealthRadio.com.
Hi there, everybody. Dr. Joe Dispenza here. My website's drjoedispenza.com. I'm the author of my latest book, You Are the Placebo, Making Your Mind Matter. And you're listening to Kate and Justin on Extreme Health Radio. I hope you enjoy the show.
All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on another episode of ExtremeHealthRadio.com. Let me turn the music down just a little bit. This is episode 373 of Extreme Health Radio, so we appreciate all you guys being on. And this is not a live show, which is kind of strange. We're used to doing, live shows, but this is not a live show. It's episode 373, and we're with Dr. Dan Engle and company. So we'll be introducing them in just a minute. We have a full studio here. I know, right? It's hard. We're all sharing mics. But so if you guys would like to support the show, we would greatly appreciate that. We have a new service called Patreon where you guys can actually donate on a per podcast basis. So if you would like to do that, you can donate as little as less than $1 or $1, $5, $10 per episode. You can do that at extremehealthradio.com/support, and that will redirect you over to Patreon where you can sign up, with your Facebook account. Modern technology. Pretty fun, right?
People kind of show up and take the reins and start this whole Patreon ball rolling.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool.
So
yeah,
that would really help out you guys.
A lot of good support. So we appreciate that. And like I said, this is episode 373, and Kate is going to be taking notes today. We have a full studio.
And you are going to try to hold your throat together over here.
I'm going to try to hold my throat
coming
together.
back from a little water contamination issue.
A little sewage spill going on.
Just that.
The beaches of San Clemente.
Ugh.
So to my right, we have Dr. Dan Engle, who was on our show just only a couple episodes ago, 370. And that was so much fun, Doctor, for being on. We appreciate you guys stopping by again today.
Yeah, that was probably one of your more exciting, so to speak, shows that we had on Monday.
Oh my gosh, that was hilarious. That was so cool. So you were able to come into the country and you weren't confiscated, didn't take anything away from you?
No, just you had to know how to smile with to the guys with guns, and those subtle little bribes help. No, not really. Yeah. There's always it's always exciting because you never know exactly who's going to show up that's representing the TSA, and if they're having a good day or a bad day. Or
I know, right?
They remind you of their unruly nephew, and so that triggers, and they're like, they want to just give you a little bit extra special attention, some personal massage time, and then
take you to the back room,
gradually let you go.
Should we have Dr. Dan introduce our other friends in the studio and say how you guys kind of know each other?
We were going to do that. Yes, perfect.
Yep. Yeah, so when we spoke on Monday, I was walking across the border in Tijuana, and I just wrapped up a weekend at the Crossroads Treatment Center. Mm-hmm. It's an Ibogaine treatment center, and I wanted to really get a sense of what the program was like, and I had met the director, who's with us here today, Martin Polanco. Mm-hmm. I'd met him through some mutual friends less than 2 months ago. My background in entheogenic research and really trying to understand, what are the complementary modalities that we can use, particularly in the fields of psychedelic research, to help with in the areas where psychiatry is really weak. So I had heard about Crossroads, had a really great connection with Martine kind of straight away, wanted to understand and see the program firsthand. So we were walking back through customs during that radio show, and as a result of coming on board with Crossroads and now having more of an understanding exactly what they do, the approach, the usage of Ibogaine there in a really phenomenal setting that I haven't seen really the equivalent of, at least in the Americas. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to continue to cross-collaborate. So Martine's here. He started, and I'll let Martine speak for himself, but the gist of it is Martine started his research and expertise in Ibogaine therapy about 14 years ago. And next to him is Deanna, and she runs the aftercare program and the recovery program, which is really so you've got, two people who are putting their heads together and creating the premier rehab center as far as I'm concerned, in the world.
Really?
Because Ibogaine itself is just so phenomenally beneficial for rewriting that addictive neurochemistry. And, classically it's opiate dependence, but it's really effective for all the addictions. And in the middle of that, it's important to have a really good experience in a controlled clinical environment where you've screened everybody. You make sure the best you can that they're going to have a safe, effective experience. And just as important as to the experience itself is being able to integrate it well. So that you actually take whether it's recovery and sobriety and now lifestyle management, and really reapproaching life in a new way from a new platform of clarity and sobriety and truth and authenticity.
And so they're helping people do that.
Totally.
With the integration. That's so cool. Thank you guys for joining us.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited. So after the show, you guys are going to split up. I forget what the schedule is. You're going to go back down to Mexico?
So Deanna's going back to San Diego. I have to go up to LA.
Okay. So how do you help people with the integration after they see you? How does that all work when they are done with their treatments and then they want to start integrating new practices into their life to overcome addictions? How does that happen?
Well, I can certainly step in here. Thanks, Justin, Kate, for having me on the show. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction.
And feel free to move the mics around because they're totally malleable. So it's all good.
So with integration, kind of skipping to the end here, we what we primarily focus on the Crossroads end of things is the psychedelic medicines. We use 2 of them, Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, which we can talk about today. Just to introduce those when we talk about integration. So for me, about 5 years ago, I started a company, Being True to You, recovery coaching. Well, it formed into recovery coaching after I met an Ibogaine provider. So over the last 4 years, I've developed a recovery program specifically to support these sacred medicines and the preparation and the integration. So there's several parts to this that we can look at today. To skip right to the question on integration, you have these medicines that are extremely powerful. I mean, in 1 week, so much work can be done. It's very common for people to say that they've experienced 100, maybe 1,000 hours of therapy in 1 week.
What do you mean by therapy? Like traditional emotional therapy?
These sacred medicines open up the mental files and the container for them to do kind of their own self-guided therapy.
Really?
Which is so powerful because, the medicines activate the psyche's inner wisdom and intelligence, which knows where the blocks are. And so when you go into these situations, you set intentions, you have an idea of what you want to create and what you want to let go of. But then you also open yourself up to a lot of trust, just knowing that the medicines are going to show you not only what's blocking you from moving forward, but maybe what kind of changes will need to take place mentally and physically, socially, environmentally to make this possible.
Going into that, I'm just wondering, sorry.
No, I'm just so intrigued.
I know. Do most people show up with, the majority, is it a physical ailment or is it more an emotional, psychological issue that they're coming in for this treatment?
So the majority of the patients that we see are addicted to opiates, which are heroin, oxycodone, methadone, and they're unable to enter sobriety because of the withdrawal. So what Ibogaine does and is amazing at is taking away the withdrawal and allowing them to enter sobriety with minimal discomfort. It seems to eliminate cravings and it elevates mood. So by having those 3 physiological effects, it helps them start their process of being clean with a clean slate. It's almost as if it reset the brain to the way it was before they started using.
So what would this do for someone who doesn't have a dependency on the opiate type? Yeah. I mean, can the average person get benefit from, like if Justin and we've never really struggled with those kinds of addictions, can anyone come to the
Absolutely.
Crossroads
So
and get
Ibogaine,
some benefits?
Ibogaine has a lot of benefits for people who are non-addicts as well, because it allows you to go back and look at things from your childhood, but in a detached way without emotional pain. And we're all dragging along things from childhood. And by being able to address these issues, you can move on.
Wow. That's amazing. So people can go there without regular traditional addictions, and they can make some
our focus
progress.
is addiction,
Uh-huh.
but we always have people who want to experience the treatment as well.
Wow.
You know, and even the people that are coming in with addiction, they are just like everybody else. So they're going to be presenting other psychological, emotional, social, relational issues or problems that they're working on. So addiction is just one of those things for people.
Well, we were talking about off the air. Was it off the air or at the end of the show with
Dan?
Dr. Dan?
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking about like addictions. Most of the time people think, substance abuse or something like that, alcohol or drugs. But addictions could be really almost anything, right?
We were covering that quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the addictive neurochemistry can be set up around any particular target or any particular focus. That could be food, computer, work,
social media,
sex, social media, drugs, alcohol, anything. And even you could get even deeper into the subconscious material, and some people get addicted to self-deprecation or
drama,
or drama or grandiosity, or there's just so many different ways that we have these particular focuses that start to rule the way we experience life, the way we see ourselves, the way we see life, the way we see each other. And so these addictive patterns, for many people, many of them are subconscious, and the roots of those are even deeper into the subconscious. Wow. So to be able to just use a standard approach where success is measured in either full abstinence or not. So, for example, if somebody's going through recovery and they're in AA and they relapse, it kind of depends on the social setting that's held in. Sometimes that's labeled as a failure because you're not clean or you're not completely sober, versus saying, well, you went from drinking daily and not being able to take care of your house, your finances, your relationships, etc., and then you relapsed into, now that the use is much less, it's not as frequent, it's not as detrimental to somebody's success in life. As far as I'm concerned, that's a transition moving towards a positive outcome.
That's a good thing.
That's just like with blood pressure. You're not going to say, oh, you have hypertension, and it's only cured when your blood pressure is normal. Yeah. But prior to that, your treatment's not any good. Yeah. So the cleansing that you're doing, even though your blood pressure was 160/90 and now it's 150/85, you're still not any good. The stuff that you're doing is not working, versus saying, oh, wow, you're actually making some great progress. Yeah. And it's a step to normalizing and optimizing your physiology, or normalizing and optimizing your subconscious belief systems, your relationship with yourself. And being able to allow people the self-empowered choice. We were talking about choice before, which is one of the great things about having these kinds of treatments and psychospiritual medicines available in a sanctified, really well-held setting. My desire is to see everybody allowed to make their own positive choice. And so once the medicines become more and more available, and that's what's happening with the resurgence in entheogenic research,
really getting big these days,
is just allow people the opportunity to make that choice on their own. And then once they make the choice, then offer them the opportunity to do that in the best setting possible, and then to integrate the experience to be able to take the benefits home. So it's amazing how particularly something like Ibogaine helps to reset that addictive neurochemistry. And as a result, there's so many downstream effects from that. So if somebody comes in and maybe they're trying to release an addiction to opiates, maybe they didn't really appreciate how also detrimental cigarettes and alcohol and food and other things that they were addicted to that are now also starting to get released.
Yeah, it's crazy that to me in our culture that it's almost like all or nothing with the 12-step program, or it's there's a guy up in UCLA, Dr. Andrew Hill, who's doing some work in this area where he's sort of taken your approach, where he's migrating people off, and so he talks about being able for people to be able to have healthy relationships with these things, and so it's not necessarily going from a 12-pack a day to nothing, because that seems almost impossible. But with the way you guys are doing it, it seems like it's a healthy progressive type thing, where it's not just all or nothing, you know?
Well, and as Dr. Dan says, it's really leaving it up to the individual. So we're not saying that there is one way to transcend addiction and work through recovery. I think that the human spirit and the true self really knows what that process is going to look like. So it's really creating a space for that person to be honest with themselves of what will this really take for me to get out of it. For some people, it has to be cold turkey. For some people, it has to be a change of environment. And for some people, the harm reduction approaches or the tapering off is much better.
So is this like a clinic like yours in Crossroads that's down in Tijuana? Are there similar treatment centers here in the United States, or is it not even possible for people to get this kind of treatment here?
The treatment is not allowed in the U.S., so there are no treatment centers here.
Is that because of Ibogaine primarily?
Correct.
And you also use, what did you say, DMT or some sort of other antiagenic?
We use a cousin of DMT, which is a 5-MeO DMT. This is derived from the Sonoran desert frog.
Okay.
The toad lives underground for 8 months of the year, and it only comes up when it rains. And it secretes this venom that when you dry it and you inhale the vapors, it occasions mystical experiences.
How did they find that? We were joking on your show. We're saying, did Dan really say it was a frog?
Did he mean a real frog? Like are they powdering frogs? What's going on?
What are they? Yeah, making tinctures out of frogs. But that's crazy.
So it's the venom. How are they collecting this stuff? I'm just curious about how this all works.
So it's sustainably harvested. There's a nonprofit in the Sonoran Desert in Hermosillo called OTAC Foundation, and they go out at night and they shine lights at the desert, and the toads come up to them. They catch them, they squeeze a gland, they collect the venom, and then
how much venom is collected, do you think, per toad?
Each toad has about 4 doses.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
And this medicine is legal in Mexico. It's been used ceremoniously and traditionally for thousands of years. There was a time where the culture lost the connection to the medicine, but they still sing the songs to the toad, and you see archaeological records of murals and Maya ruins that celebrate the toad and Aztec iconography.
What's the name of the toad?
Bufo alvarius.
That's right, you mentioned that. Bufo,
which means bull.
Okay.
Alvarius. Wow. It has another scientific name now because they wanted to distinguish it from another species, but that's what it's commonly referred to as.
So I'm just curious, what does this venom do? It's obviously to attack or kill its predators, right? So unless it's extracted this way and used medicinally, it can't do much to a human. Like
so if you were to ingest it orally, you would get sick.
You would?
You would get sick. It wouldn't kill you. So venom is not just to kill, but it's to deter. So if an animal gets a mouthful of it and experiences some of these effects, it would probably not bite that toad again.
Leave it alone. Wow. So they're sustainable and they're not in endangered. These toads are kind of everywhere, or they're
in the Sonoran Desert, which stretches from Sonora all the way up to Arizona. So you do find them in the U.S. as well.
Oh my god!
And they are endangered. So
they are
OTAC Foundation, that's part of what they do is the sustainability and making sure that anyone who is collecting the medication, the venom, knows exactly how to do it so that it doesn't hurt the toads.
Oh,
and is not extracting the toad from its environment either.
Sure.
Because you can find toad online that they're being sold.
So the toads aren't being killed or anything like that. They're just the venom's being extracted, and then they're let to.
And then they produce more?
Correct.
Wow.
How
long do these toads live? I'm just curious. Do they live for like 10 years? I mean, do they live like forever?
I don't think forever, but
not forever, but I mean magical toads.
10, 12 years.
Wow, so they have quite a long lifespan. So they can each toad can produce a lot of this venom throughout its life.
Correct.
Holy moly.
That is cool.
Things you never knew.
Is that the so you're using that and then the Ibogaine, and then so you must have seen a lot of really cool transition and stories of people that have had some really, really amazing success, I would imagine.
Unbelievable. Every single week we have people check in very tough situations, rock bottom as it's called, hopeless, and just kind of experiencing that downward spiral of loss in every single area, loss of self, loss of relationships, loss of vision, loss of passion, loss of meaning in life, of course, loss of career, finances, house, marriages. Yeah. So, and the addiction can create that. That's really that downward spiral of loss. And so that's the easiest way to explain what happens when someone comes in. But yes, through the 2 medications that we use, the Ibogaine first, which is the addiction interrupter or detox that we use, and then second, a few days later, the 5-MeO-DMT, these 2 sacred medicines are providing this opportunity for self-reflection and deep processing, and then almost like a conscious reconstruction of healthy patterns after, and these mystical experiences are really opening them up to, I guess, a realm truer and larger than their, limited reality beforehand. So things that are very troublesome walking into the program, once they leave, are more manageable.
So and fears and all that.
Absolutely.
Fears are huge.
Shame.
Shame. Wow. And so typically, how long does the average person stay?
The program is a 7-day program. The detox program is a 7-day program, Monday to Sunday.
The aftercare and recovery coaching platform that Deanna is developing is able to engage patients up to 2 years.
Well, as long as they want. So yeah, what we do is we train and certify recovery coaches, which are already people that have experience in assisting somebody from the abyss of addiction through the recovery process and beyond the recovery process. So we have kind of masters and experts from many different fields. Then we also train and certify them as recovery coaches to bring everyone on the same page with the sacred medicines and the preparation and integration involved there. And then each person that comes through the program is paired with a recovery coach leading up to the treatment and then after the treatment, which can be as many weeks, months, or years as necessary.
So where do the recovery coaches reside? Are they in Mexico or are they scattered?
Our recovery coaches are all around the nation, the United States. We have some in Canada as well. Because our patients are coming from all over the world, we are attracting coaches and people that really want to get involved with doing the integration and this therapeutic aftercare work. So yeah, we've got coaches from the west to the east coast.
That makes sense, because the coach necessarily wouldn't have to be in Mexico, because the medicines, the medicine is being administered in Mexico, but the coaches can be really anywhere.
Correct. So for the detox program, we have on-site counselors and psychologists, and lots of support team members on site to work with them. The recovery coaches are working remotely before and after the experience, so that we're not just providing a 7-day treatment program. We're creating a much larger container, as I said, to work with people.
We also have partnerships with inpatient aftercare facilities where somebody can go for 3 weeks to 3 months and be in a physical location and do exercise and yoga and participate in ayahuasca ceremonies and whatever it is that they need to do to consolidate and move away from the addiction.
Gosh, that is just so awesome. I mean, you think about the amount of fear and the addiction that people have, especially when you consider things that, like we're talking about before, that aren't necessarily drug or alcohol, but the wider range of addictions. This is just so awesome that, my goodness, like people can change their whole life in 7 days. I mean, these are people probably that have 20, 30
lifetimes
years of
Yeah, I would say, it's a process, and you can't expect the 7-day detox to completely resolve all your issues. So we strongly recommend that they do aftercare, whatever it is, that aftercare.
But you're still, was it you, Deanna, who said at the beginning it's compared to thousands of hours of basically therapy, like really whittled down?
Of good psychotherapy.
You're right. You could probably waste a lot of years and time and money on things that aren't going to get you past square one. So that's interesting.
Well, this is just what people are saying, the amount of pain that they feel they've released during that week and the amount of clarity and self-awareness and then reconnection with their true self. But even that is, that these plant medicines are really throwing them into such a raw reality. They're used to numbing themselves and being intoxicated on substances, on foods, on anything external, any kind of external entertainment like, electronics, social media, TV, and then even emotions. They're very used to having this emotional intoxication. So after you go through these plant medicines, they're fully in their raw reality and feeling everything. So even though they have gone through so much inner therapy with themselves, that's where integration comes into play is, okay, now how do I take everything I've learned and start to apply it and really discover how to be in the present moment, which is the biggest fear for somebody coming out of addiction, is this present moment. They call it boredom. They will do everything to escape this moment. But it's just the present moment. So learning how to survive and find peace in the present, in this raw reality, without intoxication.
Yeah, because that's what they're doing is they can't deal with that, right? So they're, starting to drink and these types of things.
Yeah, and many of our patients, they're self-medicating. They have underlying psychiatric issues. Say, for example, somebody's manic and they drink, they calm down. Or they're anxious, they use heroin, they feel normal.
What about obsessive compulsive behavior? Is that something that's also, that seems like that's a pretty deep down, is that a subconscious thing? Or what's going on with obsessive compulsive?
Well, it's subconscious and it's neurochemical.
Okay.
It's like the nurture nature part of it. There's a root. There's some kind of corrective experience that's desiring to be driven to the forefront to be able to relieve the underlying conflict.
Interesting.
So there's OCD it's classically one of those that includes a lot of checking kind of psychological issues as well as behavioral issues. So there's a lot of repatterned process and practices and physical things that are done to a sense to over and over and over until there's some sense of satisfaction or some sense of release of that really severe anxiety. OCD is a tricky one, and there are interestingly enough, there's some really beautiful targeted supplementations that are helpful for arresting the severity of the symptoms. It's still super important to do the deeper underlying psychological work. And so this is where, Deanne's point's a really good one. The medicines in general, Ibogaine is one of many psychedelic and entheogenic medicines that are really helpful for resolving underlying subconscious trauma and conflict. Ayahuasca is another one, peyote, huachuma, San Pedro cactus, psilocybin. So much research now on psilocybin. A lot of research coming up again around LSD. LSD was just amazing, thousands of case reports of benefit in using it with psychotherapy. So you have this psychotherapeutic assisted psychedelic experience. And so that's what MAPS.org. MAPS is the company that the research organization that Rick Doblin runs. And they're doing Ibogaine research, psilocybin research, ayahuasca research, MDMA research. MDMA is another one of those that's amazing at helping people resolve underlying PTSD. And PTSD, like OCD, are some of these really entrenched neurologic patterns and pathways that are associated with subconscious conflict and trauma. Sometimes it's known trauma. Like, I was walking down the road with my friend in Afghanistan, and boom, IED goes off, he dies, and I'm like, psychologically fractured.
Yeah.
That's a known trauma. Sometimes trauma comes in, it's super early, it's pre-verbal, so it's hard to access. That's why, when Deanne's talking about the psychedelic experience being potentially the equivalent of thousands of hours of good psychotherapy, it's because it's hard at times if you're using a talk therapy mode of engagement. It's difficult to get to pre-verbal trauma.
What do you mean by pre-verbal?
So largely the psychological makeup, when you look at the clinical data and like developmental research, largely the psychological makeup is solidified, majority, like 85% or plus or minus some percentage points of the psychological makeup is solidified by 5 years old.
Solidified and done, and there it is. There's your
right. So you're like constitutionally made of who you are and who you'll generally continue to be psychologically throughout the rest of your life, unless you've been doing some deep soul level, deep psychic level, deep subconscious level work. So that's like before we're even in grade school.
Yeah, we don't even know. 5 years old.
And that's before we've myelinated or formulated a lot of the prefrontal cortex area that is associated with conscious thought and clear ability to self-observe and communicate internal feelings.
Okay.
So all of these verbal and self-aware cortical fields are starting to are continuing to develop and solidify really throughout childhood, throughout adolescence. The brain continues to develop even to the age of maybe 20, 21, 22, which is interesting when you start to talk about having, letting kids drive at 16, letting them carry guns at 18, and letting them drink at 21. You're giving kids and adolescents a lot of autonomy and opportunity to self-experiment, which is great. I'm all for self-experimentation. That's why I like putting myself in the lab. Right. But oftentimes you're doing that without a whole lot of coaching, mentoring, support, because parents aren't paying attention, or maybe they're addicted, or they're just, caught up in the Western mental rat race. So this whole developmental spectrum, and that's another reason why when I did my fellowship in child psychiatry, I was really disheartened to see how consistently the field relies on adult psychiatric medications to modify childhood behavior when you haven't looked at the underlying core issues and you don't know the long-term neurodevelopmental ramifications of these medications.
So these medications are obviously tapered down for a child, but they're, like you said, adult medications.
They're
right?
adult medications, right? So you're dosing it mg per kg, or like by weight.
Yeah.
But the neurodevelopmental ramifications aren't fully appreciated or understood. And you have, these really significant, like antipsychotic medications being used off-label for young kids.
Like how young are they?
Like 5, 6 years old. They're kids on Seroquel.
What is it called?
Seroquel is an antipsychotic medication that a lot of people use for sleep because it's such a sedative. And so you've got a rambunctious kid that's acting out the environment. Kids are sponges, right? So they pick up on the environment and they express it through behavior. That's what we're supposed to do, particularly as kids. Be super open, be in this kind of like constant child's mind of curiosity, super learning, always curious about what's going to happen next, taking in information. And then what do kids do? They don't have, because they haven't really yet formulated the internal constructs to be able to really verbalize well what's going on internally. They act it out. Right? And we learn as adults to not do that through, because we get in trouble in school and we get in trouble at home. And so we're taught to just sit down, shut up, not ask a lot of questions, and keep making widgets.
Stay quiet, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you've got kids on, a lot of medications and in psychopharmacological soups of medications, like, if they're anxious, they're on a benzo, and if they're, hyper, then they're on the stimulant like Ritalin or Adderall.
Sometimes both. Right?
Sometimes both. And if they don't sleep, then they're on Seroquel and maybe or Benadryl or maybe whiskey. It's like crazy amounts of interventions from the outside that adjust neurochemistry. And so when that happens, then what's happening in the subconscious field, unless you're working with somebody who's, and I've had teachers and mentors who were phenomenal child therapists who were just really intuitive, could really understand what was going on, and really help the family identify how the kid was expressing the family chaos or the family trauma, and then to be able to unravel that. But that's not the norm. So you have these pharmacological interventions, and therefore it drives everything that's happening in the subconscious down even further.
So it's even more difficult.
So it's even more difficult to access. Yeah. So as adults, if we're expressing depression, addiction, insomnia, some kind of subconscious, symptomatology, then that's hard to access through talk therapy. You've got pre-verbal trauma, you've got transgenerational trauma, you've got all this stuff that's holding it under the surface, but then you have the opportunity to come into like a really beautifully held ceremony of sorts. I tend to think that the psychedelic experience, when held in a good way, is ceremonially.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's not recreational. Our outcome is healing. It's not play. And that's not to say that I haven't done some of that myself, and I don't think it has its role, because we are recreational beings and social beings, and we are here to play and experience joy, and we're also here to do our work. So if we're being limited by subconscious experience and symptoms, then it's great to be able to come into a framework where these sacred medicines are held in a good way, that has some ceremonial context, and that it's also safe. And that's one thing I really appreciate about Crossroads, and the fact that we are, as a unit in a clinical team, we're building the first psychedelic research hospital in the world. specific to the study of psychedelic medicines and how they help healing on all levels, body, mind, spirit, heart, and soul, not just the addiction framework, but how are all aspects of life now changing through the right and appropriate use of these medicines. And this field of entheogenic research is coming online so quickly. It's kind of outpacing right now the implementation of good standards of care, the right practices. Like generally, what would be the best kind of setup for somebody to be facilitating these ceremonies or these medicine-oriented clinical experiences. So you've got a lot of people in the underground movement, like ayahuasca is popping up all over the world.
Yeah, it's huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of people pouring medicine because, they spend a month down in the jungle. Now they want to call themselves a shaman and pour medicine because they had an amazing experience. And maybe they have good intentions and they're not necessarily trying to take your money, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to take care of business if the shit goes down in a bad way.
Which it sometimes does.
Which it definitely can.
Some people can have psychotic experiences with psychedelics, especially when they have already had these, issues come up in the past. For example, somebody who's hearing voices should not take psychedelics.
Or maybe if they're on medication already, right?
Absolutely.
If they're on medications, if they have a history of psychosis, if they have a history of mania, or any significant mood dysregulation, or if they're already significantly depersonalized or disconnected from their life, then there's a lot of preparation work to do. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to access that experience in the future, but they have to do some serious preparation work with somebody who's knowledgeable, has a clinical background or some kind of psychiatric or psychological background to help them prep in a good way.
So you were saying that the interest and the growth in this type of medicine, plant medicines and things like that are sort of growing faster than the not the demand, but it's all growing so fast together. And we were talking about, excuse me, at the end of your show, that we thought that Amber on her site has a tool or some sort of way to look at these locations and rate them and see if they're any good. I'm not sure if that's correct, but people can go to places and find out if, like you mentioned, the Temple, the Way of Light, Crossroads. These are all these places that people can find out about and look at reviews. Or
there's some kind of, particularly for ayahuasca, there's I think an ayahuasca advisor or some kind of website oriented arm that rates these kinds of centers.
Okay.
Now I've also heard that there's a potential criticism there because some of the sites themselves will donate money to the review to get a better rating. Man. Right? So sometimes it's not totally clean. So if that's the case, as far as I'm concerned, people should do their due diligence, investigate the setting that they're looking to have an experience in, see what other people's testimonials have been. Does that place have a good track record? Have they been up and running for more than 6 months? Have they been up and running for like 5 to 10 years? Do they have all of the clinical treatment team, the necessary screening modalities? If you call them up and they're saying, "Oh yeah, we've got an opening next week. You want to join us?" Great. As opposed to saying, "Well, let's take a history. Do you have a history of psychosis? Do you have a history of mania? What's your psychedelic experience? What are your goals?" I mean, to like really ask some due diligent questions,
right? Versus
just saying, "Oh yeah, come on in. We've got a spot waiting for you."
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot to pay attention to in that kind of lead up, and super important to do that kind of screening.
Yeah, I would imagine, because I mean, places like this would be willing to take your money and administer the medicine, and so that would make a lot of sense. You would really want to screen.
I'm really curious. Speaking of this, how many people are turned away? Like, if you have 100 people, how many are you actually able to treat? I'm just really interested in that.
Good. Yeah.
But there's some pretty strict inclusion criteria for the treatment. And if somebody's morbidly obese or on certain medications or has a history, like Dr. Deanna was saying, of psychosis or mania, we can't treat them. In terms of percentages, it's difficult because sometimes we just don't follow up with them. So that we don't tell them, like, no, we're not going to treat you. But we just don't, we don't push it.
For example, just to bring it into like a clinical vignette, there was a person that just came really recently who because of a variety of different factors, including the fact that when we did her screening EKG, her heart monitor, she had a heart variability. And Ibogaine is one of those medicines, particularly that if you have a significant history of heart disease, heart attacks, or you're on some kind of cardiac medication, then you're excluded from entering, because the way Ibogaine can work is it lowers people's blood pressure and heart rate. Okay. So many centers, if you don't know that, like centers that are doing it kind of in a traditional sense, maybe you roll in and they don't screen you for issues related to your heart, and then that's when things can go not so good.
Wow. So is there if someone is required to be off a heart medication, is there a duration of time that they...
Yes, it's mainly psychiatric medications that we are concerned about. We do screen for heart issues. And for the different medications, there's different lengths of time depending on their half-life and such.
Okay, interesting.
So it is complex. It's not as simple as saying, okay, get off of everything, because you also have to get off of them slowly. Otherwise, you get symptoms from that.
Yeah, because I'm sure, I mean, a lot of people try to get off medication slowly, and it's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that last time on Monday, too, and just briefly touching in on, like, this is another whole kind of topic of conversation. How do you come off psychiatric medications well? And many people want to be included in something like the Ibogaine work or ayahuasca work or a variety of other things, and they're told that if you're on a psychiatric medication, then you can't partake. So one of a few things could happen. They'll say, well, I just won't tell them so that I'll be included, and then that's when things really go bad. Because there is a big clash, there's a contraindication, there's a neurochemical chaos that happens as a result of those two trying to play on the same battlefield. And or I won't do it because I can't get off of my medications, or I'm just going to white knuckle it. I'm going to cold turkey my meds and have the resurgence of all these symptoms leading into a workshop. So that would be like not so ideal. So
have you ever seen stuff like that?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Totally. You're like, I wish you wouldn't have cold turkey that, because you're just so unstable now, and now you don't even look strong enough and stable enough and clear and centered enough to go through this program. So you've been suffering for the last week or two. You feel really shitty, and oh, by the way, now we can't treat you. So let's have you go home, restart your medications, maybe not on the previous dose, because at least you've had some washout. But okay, so what would be the taper? That's different for every medicine. But generally, you want to take a comprehensive holistic psychiatric supportive protocol. So that's that CHIPS acronym.
Okay.
And that essentially means, I break it down into 4 steps. You have to stabilize the parasympathetic system.
Okay.
Help people start to relax and get good sleep. Then use targeted supplementation directed to their core symptoms. So if somebody has depression, then you can use a bank of supplements to help the serotonin and GABA support. If somebody has anxiety, you can use a bank of supplements to help kind of calm down that neuroadrenergic dopamine arm of things, side of the equation, because you have that seesaw in the neurochemistry. You have the excitatory neurochemistry and the inhibitory neurochemistry. So you step 1, calm everything down. Step 2, use targeted supplementation. Step 3, at that point, is when you start to detoxify the system. But that's only after all the channels of detoxification are open and you've started to support the symptoms at their core. So many people try and get to the detoxification part right away without doing step 1 and step 2 first. And that's usually when healing crises happen.
Because their liver can't purge these chemicals and all that.
Exactly. Right? So you start rearranging the deck chairs, but you're not really clearing the field.
Right.
And then the 4th step is the lifestyle management. So that's that whole comprehensive kind of platform. Now, and then we get really specific on which medications people are on, and then helping them come up with a plan for gradually weaning that to support their preparation phase and help them show up in the best way possible to do the deeper, bigger work with something like Ibogaine.
Wow. And so interest in this whole plant medicine thing is just growing like crazy. We were talking about this before, right? I'm sure you guys are seeing a huge upsurgence with this kind of thing.
Well, there's certainly a lot more clinics, and I use the word clinic loosely. So it's mainly patients that have gone through the treatment. They're so enthralled and motivated by the experience they had that they rent a little house on the beach and they start doing treatments themselves. So it's largely an unregulated industry in Mexico. So that comes with a lot of problems. But there is also increased demand.
So what are the is it possible to put like a number or a success rate or the amount of people that come in 5 years later, how are they all doing?
So 5 years later, there's no study that actually looks that long, but there was one recent study that looked at the outcomes from Brazil, and they followed patients, and they saw that 61% were clean after 6 months, which is really remarkable for the field of addiction medicine, where usually the relapse rate is 95%.
95. And clean means, what does that mean?
So clean means off their drug of choice, and generally they were measuring for cocaine, alcohol, heroin.
Wow. So clean. So
you just went essentially from 5% to 60%.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
That's amazing. That is just amazing. Wow.
And this is obviously with the inclusion of aftercare and individualized therapy, which is really important because the way that traditionally or that rehab is done in the West, it's group therapy. So you're sitting around in a group and you're talking about your problems, but that is often not therapeutic.
Why so?
Well, because you're rehashing all your stories and you're listening to other stories about people using, so you get desire to use.
Yeah.
Do you remember that was like when we had Sheila Hemphill on the show a long time ago? She was talking about traditional therapy.
Yeah.
And I felt kind of bad, but she said it's like handing someone a bucket, throwing up in it, pouring it out, digging all through it, and then putting it back into the bucket and handing it to you. And she goes, there's just other things that need to be done. And otherwise, you're just dumping out your bucket of the same old stuff and gathering it right back. And that can do sometimes a lot more damage, really.
Yeah, plus if there's like a woman with sexual trauma and you're asking her to share in a group, I mean, that's profoundly untherapeutic.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people's issues and problems are like that, where they don't want to fully open up because it's a personal thing.
They just don't. Yeah, so individualized therapy, that's what science has proven to work for addiction.
Wow. This is just so incredible. I'm just so it's just so awesome because, I mean, we all know people in our life that have alcohol addiction. I mean, so many people. And so how does someone determine if they are in fact addicted? Because I know people that sort of have drinks every night. At what point do you say, I guess if it's endangering your life or if it's
the definition of addiction, one of the definitions is when it starts affecting your economic, social, educational, professional life.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess a common definition for addiction is when the person cannot stop the behavior despite negative consequences. So that would be the general definition, is that they clearly have many adverse side effects, and again, as I was saying earlier, losses in all areas of their life, but they're unable to stop or control the behavior.
And they always say, I can stop anytime. I can stop anytime I want, but it's clearly not the case.
Yeah, a great example that comes to my mind is sugar.
Yeah.
Sugar is the biggest addictor really on the planet, most widely held addictive substance on the planet. Yeah. So just think about how much time, and I'll just speak from my own perspective because I've been addicted to sugar in the past.
Yeah.
How much time you spend thinking about something, or how much of your mental bandwidth it takes up. How much of the daily relationship with life is taken up with planning for alcohol, sugar, heroin, whatever, planning for it, having it, then coming down from it, and then starting that cycle all over again.
Going and getting
it,
all that.
Right.
Yes, I always liked Gabor Mate's distinction between passion and addiction, because they're both highly energetic drives in our life. He says that addiction drives or moves you towards your worst self, whereas passion moves you towards your best self. Okay. So they both can be very consuming in your life. They both can consume your mind and your time and your energy. But to evaluate, is this good for me or bad for me, you have to look, is this behavior moving me toward my worst self, or is this behavior moving me toward my best self? And that can be a personal reflection, or a person can even start to ask their loved ones and people around them, what do you see? So there are many ways to look at that and see. And I think for each person, it can be subjective as well as to how much it is influencing them. Because if we really look at it, many of our patterns are addictive, and we have many dependencies, but dependencies don't necessarily mean unhealthy. It just means, is it moving us toward our worst self or our best self?
Yeah, that's so true. I remember David Wolf. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him.
Yes.
He's a big raw food guy. Mm-hmm. And I remember him talking about people in addictions, and he said something about how people will he'll talk to people and they'll say, I'm not addicted to anything or whatever. And then he'll say, the biggest addiction in our culture is the pillow. We all sleep with a pillow, and we can't. If you try to not sleep with a pillow, it's almost impossible not to, because we're so addicted to trying to sleep with a pillow. And he was saying that addiction is much more than just these big things that people talk about. And so it's cool that what was that guy's name? Gabor Mate. He made that distinction about moving towards your best version of yourself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at that. So with people that come to your clinic, what are some of the more, I guess, bigger stories or some of the greatest transformations that you've seen with people? What are some really great turnaround stories have you?
Okay.
If you can share, I know that you can't share.
Yeah, so some
personal details and things, but.
Well, yeah. So that there's first of all, in the 7 days that they're there, there's an extreme turnaround for everybody. When people come in very depleted in every aspect of the word, and when they leave just very fueled again with life. Through that 7 days, and then even in the weeks following, we've seen complete turnaround. So it just depends on which level you're looking at. So psychologically, we see, people that have extreme trauma or, PTSD that are unable to leave their homes, that are now all of a sudden able to, re-engage in life again. We see people that are so depressed or anxious, or, social anxiety, again, that they're isolating, they're withdrawn, they've alienated themselves from life, who are now able to leave their homes, and not only leave their homes, but go out and pursue careers that they've never thought were possible for them. We've seen people get out of, really toxic, unhealthy situations. It could be within their family dynamics. It could be within a marriage. Could be within just their social network, who finally are able to, have the strength and the courage and the confidence to, get up and walk out of these situations. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing massive transformations on a psychological and emotional level in terms of just release and healing and clarity. And then we're seeing, extreme transformations on a social environmental level of people being able to remove themselves from a very unhealthy situation and, create a healthier environment for them.
That's so cool.
We just have literally hundreds and hundreds of stories. There's a person in the house with us right now that traveled here with us that just underwent treatment 2 months ago and is now working on our team. Oh, and really? He had said, if you told me 3 months ago that I would be, applying for medical school and having a job and doing CrossFit and yoga every day, there's no way I would have ever believed that. Wow. So it's really amazing, the transformation that happens quickly. As recovery coaches, our job is to really kind of sometimes slow that down and make sure it's happening step by step, because the transformation happens in such a big way that I liken it to somebody taking the elevator instead of taking the stairs. It's so that if they have a slip, they fall back to the very bottom. So that is one of the challenging things with these plant medicines, is that the transformation is so huge, it's so vast, that a person, and especially that addictive mindset, always looking for a quick fix, it wants to go from rock bottom to the very top of the world in a short amount of time. And they certainly do try. So the transformation happens, but it also has to be guided in a very conscious, intentional way, so that they are cultivating the strengths and the skills that they need to maintain that as they go.
So is that the biggest challenge, you think, working with people afterwards? Do you think it's challenging for people to continue on with the recovery process? That is one. Yeah, that's one aspect. Also, the families are really important to engage in the process, because if the patient goes back home and feels fantastic and wants to move on with their life, but everybody treats them like an addict and doesn't trust them, then they will live up to their expectations. So people sometimes may have to come back and go through another treatment.
It happens. It happens. It's not the norm, but some people do require a second treatment.
So one of the things that because Kate and I have not tried any of these types of plant medicines before, and we're so keen to do so. But one of the things she brought up was a question about, what if you, go through something like this, ayahuasca or something like that, and your brain just never comes back. Like you just are in this state forever. Does that happen, or can it happen?
In my experience, when held in a good way, when the right screening, the right preparation, the right container is set, and the right integration, that never happens. And I'm very reticent to ever use the words always or never.
Yeah.
So I say that with a caveat. I haven't seen that happen, and I've been in the circles now for a decade, and there are a lot of other people who are a lot smarter and more experienced than I am, and I've heard them say the same thing.
Really?
When you've done your due diligence, and that also means not only the right setting but the right usage, because any medicine has its sweet spot. That means below the sweet spot, you don't get much of a therapeutic benefit. Above the sweet spot, it becomes a poison. So when held well and doing all the due diligence, and when dosed appropriately, it's an amazingly awakening experience. And another thing along the same kind of lines that people ask me oftentimes because I've been doing this kind of research and putting myself in the laboratory for a decade or so.
You've done a few hundred, right? Or
yeah.
Sessions.
Yeah. So the common question is, why do you keep coming back?
Yeah.
And that's we could look at that a few different ways. One is that I'm constantly studying it. I'm constantly studying the effect. I love that exploration. I love that experimentation. I feel confident in that setting. I can tell when the container's held in a good way. I know what the dosage is. I know if I've pushed the envelope too far. I know when to back off. So I'm constantly studying it, and I'm constantly evolving. We are constantly evolving. Our consciousness is constantly evolving. Enlightenment, when you talk to the rishis and the sages and the teachers, the contemporary teachers, enlightenment is not, and that's not necessarily something that I'm striving for. I do appreciate the fact that my consciousness has evolved over time, largely with the support of doing the internal work, meditation, and receiving psychedelics in a good way. We are constantly evolving, so enlightenment is not one of those things where it's a light switch and it goes on, it stays on. We're constantly working on self-development. Yeah. We're constantly evolving as people. We're constantly understanding deeper and greater truths about life. And so I think there's always more work to do. And not everybody's going to climb Everest, so not everybody necessarily needs to do their work in the midst of a psychedelic experience. However, I do believe that we're at one of those critical times in humanity and on the planet where we're being asked to find our best self, our passion, our purpose, as relatively efficiently and as effectively as we can, and do that in a sustainable way so that we can continue this human experiment on the global scale for generations to come. Yeah. And if we don't rewrite the ship in a relatively efficient, effective way, then it's likely that within our lifetimes we're going to cross that threshold, and it's going to be difficult to rewrite the ship and reestablish a sustainable relationship with the plant, because now our resources are threatened beyond the point of return.
Right.
So the psychedelic experience is just one tool to help people wake up in a quick, effective way, and that has some caveats. It has some risks, and that's why it's so important to have these kinds of conversations. And I'm so excited about the research that's being done now.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Because this is research that validates the psychedelic experience within the container of the medical paradigm of held clinical trials.
Are researchers and the whole medical side of things, are they starting to open their mind to maybe there is something with this whole plant medicine thing and psychedelics? Are they starting to sort of be open to this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons is a consumer-driven model. People are pissed off that their Zoloft doesn't get them the promised effect, and now that they've taken 200 milligrams of Zoloft today, and maybe their depression's a little bit better, but it's mostly because they're psychically numb, and now they have poor libido, and they have erectile dysfunction and obesity, and now all the downstream effects of those side effects are super frustrating. So the consumers are driving the movement. And there are some really core people in the field that have held the lamp and the light for entheogenic research over these 30 years since it's been underground and was made illegal by the Nixon administration. There's some people in the field that just held it down. And it was a little bit more underground and not maybe so above board because they would have been ridiculed and persecuted, but they just held a strong light. Now you're seeing more and more above board entheogenic research. Again, particularly around psilocybin, MDMA, a bit of a resurgence in LSD, now more for things like Ibogaine and ayahuasca. It's this great growing movement, and I think we're just going to continue to see that field expand.
Is psilocybin similar to DMT, or what's the differences and similarities? Are they kind of the same thing?
The experience can be pretty similar. Neurochemically and pharmacologically, they work a bit different. Neurochemically, they work different, but neuroanatomically, they work kind of similar because they turn on the same parts of the brain that's oriented towards the psychedelic experience. And so when you look at brain scans of what's happening, it's not too dissimilar than what happens in deep states of meditation or long periods in the float tank. That's why I think, again, the medicines are one arm. And we're starting to substantiate and validate what they're doing is very similar in many ways to what old guys in the cave for 20 years were doing in meditation. Yet we're speeding up that process.
Well, these medicines have been around forever, haven't they? I mean, they've been around. Almost all ancient cultures use these types of plant medicines, and we're talking before on the other show about how they, at least with ayahuasca, about how they, it's a leaf and a vine, and the vine somehow interacts with your own body's ability to uptake. What is it? It turns off the enzyme so that the leaf can work. And
and what's in that leaf? That leaf has DMT.
I mean, how do they know this? Crazy. How do they know this? How long has this stuff been around, do you think? Since the beginning of time?
I think these medicines have been around for thousands of years.
How long have we been using them, do you think? I guess it's unknowable, isn't it?
There's a great book called Food for the Gods by McKenna, and he talks about the history of soma.
Food for the Gods?
Yeah. And there's different ideas about what that psychedelic medicine was, whether it was marijuana, whether it was psilocybin, whether it was amanita. But we are pretty good when we're not so stuck in kind of the Western mindset and electronic landia. We're good at observing our environment. And so oftentimes the medicine men and the shamans, so to speak, they would be even better than your average Joe at observing the environment and how the natural how nature interacted with itself. So what animals were using, what shrubs and herbs and plants to heal something within themselves. So like, for example, when the bear wakes up from hibernation, the first thing it goes for is osha root. And osha root is this purgative. So it helps the bear purge all of this kind of like stuck lymphatic cellular debris that's built up over 6 months, helps it purge that right away. So somebody observing what the bear is going to use with osha root, like, oh, that must be a purgative, that must be a lymphatic cleanser, that must be a GI kind of tonic. And so they call it bear root, and that's for a reason. And so the shaman, we are pretty good at observing nature. And so I think it was probably quite likely that people started foraging for food and picked up some mushrooms and then had a psychedelic experience. And that may have been exactly what helped to stimulate consciousness. Because there was this evolutionary leap in our consciousness, relatively recent in the grand scheme of things. And what supported that? How did that come on board?
Doesn't Terence McKenna have this whole theory about how that worked, about how the apes ate the mushrooms that were going out of the
cow
poop,
patties.
The cow patties. Yeah, doesn't he have this whole theory about that?
Yeah. He's written books about that and how the mushrooms are directly linked to the evolution of language.
And consciousness and the human brain and all that.
Correct.
Fascinating stuff. I wonder why. Excuse me. I wonder why we're so afraid of. You remember in the 80s, the Nancy Reagan "Don't do just say no" and all this stuff, and maybe it's just because we're so propagandized and taught these things to be afraid of these. I think that's probably why we're all so. I think there still is a lot of work to be done in terms of waking the average person up, the average Western person who doesn't know anything about health or this type of medicine or these options. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to take a lot. Still, I think still a lot of work to do in waking people up.
Yeah. So what's happening in the field with the progressive movement in scientific research is to demystify the medicines, to destigmatize the medicines, give people open source the information, and give people free choice.
This is what's so awesome about this time that we live. I mean, it shows.
Totally.
I mean, you have all kinds of people, podcasts, and people doing stuff online. People are finding stuff. I can't believe they still make allow people to have open source information like this. That's so crazy.
I know. Thankfully, it's still happening, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, so when someone's at the clinic, like if they come to Crossroads and they go through a week, obviously, it's going to be a process, a journey, for that 7 days. When they're in that process, is there a really a great effect on people in terms of them wanting to leave and they can't make it through? You know how you see these stories of people going through a transformation process and halfway through they're like, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. Is there that kind of effect, or is it more of a gentle thing, or how does it kind of work?
Yeah, that absolutely happens. There are many people that come down, they're very hopeful, but once they get there, it becomes very real that change is happening. So yeah, I think it crosses everybody's mind. Okay, where's the front door? And is it possible for me to escape?
How do I get out of here?
That is very true. But most of them, will go through with it. Afterward, there's this immediate need to run home and fix things. People are very homesick right after they take the medicine. And I think they're very excited to move forward and create changes in their life. But I also think it's like, okay, I've seen enough. I don't want to do any more work. I've got just a little bit of a transformation. I just want to go home and work with this now. So I definitely see that tendency to escape the experience. And again, that's part of the consciousness and the conscious conversations that we bring, is to look at that, because there's this tendency to run back in the hole.
So
the dark hole.
So you were talking on the last show how it turns off the dopamine receptor sites or something in the body, where people are not necessarily wanting. Because it's one thing to just say, no, I'm just craving this drug, or I'm craving some alcohol, and I really want it, but I'm going to say no for the rest of my life. And I'm just in this constant struggle. But it sounds like this is working at a little deeper level, so where people are walking away from it, and they're not really desiring that sort of hit. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So that seems to break the linkages in the brain between the drug craving and the drug. So they're able to, for example, we asked them after the treatment, so if I were to give you a shot of whiskey, would you drink it? And they're like, nope, absolutely not.
Really? How many times do they take a medicine? I guess that depends on each person.
Yeah, so the Ibogaine is a single administration modality, so it's given once.
What? So it's given one time?
Yeah, sometimes in the subsequent days, if there is residual withdrawal, we can give small doses to help them deal with their symptoms, but the treatment is one dose.
How is it taken?
Orally?
In
capsules.
In capsules, really? So they make capsules. Wow, what is it?
So,
what is it? I'm so curious.
What is this magic?
I know.
That should have been the first question of the whole interview. What is this?
What the heck is Ibogaine?
So it's an alkaloid found in shrub that grows in West Africa.
Okay.
And it's being used traditionally by the Bwiti religion, and they use it as a rite of passage for their young people
to
become adults. It's also used medically to deal with a lot of medical conditions, which they have seen benefits.
So how do they take it, the Africans?
They scrape the root bark, and they just eat it.
Really? And so in our world, we can just make capsules out of it and determine dosage and things.
Yeah,
like that.
we extract the active ingredient, we purify it to a pharmaceutical grade level, and then we administer that in capsule form.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Is that how it's always done?
In the medical setting, yes.
In the medical setting, yeah.
But then you can take it other ways too.
You can take it as a root, but because it has other alkaloids, there's a different risk profile to it, because each alkaloid has its own effects on the heart. So it's for the actual detox, we can't use the other root part. Mm-hmm.
So it's extracted, put into pill form, and then they're given it, one time. Mm-hmm. And wow.
I'm so curious. Is there an age restriction for the? Do you see 18 and older or that kind of thing, or some children that are deeply rooted in?
We haven't
addiction
seen anybody below 16.
Below 16.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And typically, the age range is between 18 and 60.
Okay.
For somebody under 18 in a certain situation, if their parents approved, they may qualify.
So why 60?
Well, the risks of something going wrong, they increase with age, and because we're dealing with such a high-risk patient population with intravenous drug addicts, somebody who's been using intravenous drugs for 40 years is a pretty high risk.
Gosh, that's amazing.
And just to put it into context too, around the age piece, this is in the clinical setting with Ibogaine and in a treatment setting with like clear outcomes and oftentimes with an addictive population. The place in the center that I first took Iboga was in Costa Rica. Okay. And I started talking to these guys about what they had done, the training that they had done in order to get to that place of facilitating ceremony. Mm-hmm. And they went through the initiatory rites in Gabon with the Bwiti tribe, where you're taking like truckloads of the root bark all day for a week.
Goodness.
Right, and you like pretty much, and they dance you up and sing you up, and it's a very community, socially driven activity. And the kids, these little kids, like elementary school age kids, are running around eating mouthfuls of bark themselves of the Iboga.
Containing the, oh my gosh.
Right, so the Iboga is the plant, and the Ibogaine is the primary alkaloid. So you got a lot of kids just running around, just eating root bark. Because it's so in their culture. This is a traditional medicine that's woven into the culture. That's why Gabon calls Iboga a national treasure. So their entire culture, similar to the Shipibo people with ayahuasca, kids often start drinking ayahuasca early on.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Like elementary, middle school age kids in ceremony. Again, you're dosing it. Not so well. Actually, I won't even make that comparison because that's not fair. But we were talking earlier about like kids taking psychiatric medications. They're adult medications, but you just dose it differently, right? By weight. Yeah. Same kind of thing with Iboga or ayahuasca, in that you would give that kid less dose just because he's a smart little tyke. But the difference being, as opposed to psychiatric medications that you're trying to like target particular symptoms, you're using these traditional medicines to allow, like Deanna was saying, to bring that best self forth.
Yeah, it's a whole different thing.
A whole different thing.
And the intention behind it is not
a whole different thing.
Because for us, we take medication and we don't know what it is, where it came from, why we're doing it. Some guy just told us.
Not even the psychiatrists know sometimes what the drug is actually doing.
Yeah, and if you talk to most psychiatrists, would you want to take this? They'd say, like, I wouldn't take that.
Yeah.
Would you want your kids to take that? I wouldn't want my kids to take that.
But they'll write you up a script for it.
Right, because that's the standard of care, and they don't have other options. I don't think it's so much out of malice as it is just ignorance.
It's just in lack of options.
In lack of options.
Yeah, and it's a different treatment paradigm. I mean, in the West, where the pharmaceutical industry likes drugs which you have to take every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to have a drug that you take only once, it doesn't fit into their profit model. So.
Yeah. That doesn't, yeah. And plus, too, in these, cultures, especially in the ancient cultures, like, there's everyone knew what they were doing, why they were doing it, and they were taught it through their family lineage and things like this. So, the motivation behind taking it and taking these plant medicines, and plus you have the buffering alkaloids from the whole plant and things like that, and it's less synthesized and all that. But it's wild because a lot of people might think, wow, you would give ayahuasca to a little child, but we think, oh, it's okay to give some sort of synthetic drug to a little child,
right?
Because a guy in a white coat said so. But it's just so strange that disconnect is just weird,
right? Yeah. You're giving kids mind altering prescription medicines.
It's a little kid.
right? That has a huge side effect profile.
Yeah.
And you're denying the family the opportunity to make a clear choice on their own to give their family or their child a mind-altering experience with something that is growthful, can be integrative, can help that best self-worth come forth with a much less significant side effect profile.
And there is studies that show that when children are giving Adderall or Ritalin, they are predisposed to addiction later in life.
Oh, really? They're predisposed to it, so they have this...
They're more likely to develop it.
Yeah, that makes... Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and Justin, I like what you say about intention. You know, when your child is taking the psychiatric medications, the intention is to stay on that long term and to just almost mitigate or manage the symptoms, not cure the symptoms or actually treat the underlying problem. Whereas with psychedelic medicines, the intention is a one-time thing or maybe a journey down the road. But in that moment, it's just a one-time treatment for very specific intentions that are more focused around a cure. And it's not that that particular medicine is a cure, but the intention is to lead that person down a path to where they can have a full recovery and move beyond some of the issues that they're dealing with. Not just treat the issues and say, well, this is a problem you're always going to have and you're always going to have to deal with medicines. So this is why we talk about the new era of recovery and the renaissance of psychiatry, because it's the perception and the paradigm going into these is completely different. And therefore the outcome is completely different.
Yeah, the mindset. It's all really about intention and that, and the mindset. And you know, one of our doctors who was on the show, he was saying, you know, the great issue in psychosis is people thinking that they actually own things. So when people get a diagnosis or they get these sort of labels that are attached to whatever physical condition they have, they actually think that that's theirs, and that's a deeper psychological problem where you say, oh, I have cancer or I have diabetes, and somehow the I is connected to this thing called cancer, and there's a big... But with the intention behind stuff, I think it's really big, and it makes a lot of sense too that the medical model wouldn't like that, because a single dose, you know, I mean that is not profitable for people.
No,
it's crazy, because you know people are on medication their whole life.
Right. Right.
It's
And this whole field of psychiatric renaissance, this whole movement is as it relates to the plant medicines, as it relates to the psychedelics and the antigens, is just part of the larger movement where we're seeing integrative psychiatry through a variety of really cool, sophisticated modalities be able to allow people to achieve their own personal goals in a much more efficient, effective, short-term but long-lasting effect, a short-term treatment intervention, relatively speaking, with long-term benefits. Wow. So this is going to continue to shift, and it's going to continue to evolve. And I think this whole movement is kind of like a train. You know, sometimes it's slow to get going, but once it gets going, you've got a lot of momentum behind you.
Yeah.
And it would take a lot to just arrest it completely.
Can people ease in, like not necessarily for addiction in this type of treatment like that, but if they wanted to do something like ayahuasca, or I'm not sure if people would do Ibogaine, you know, in the same way they would do ayahuasca. Maybe they would, but would they do it? Is it possible for people to sort of ease in and do little small amounts and see how they go and continue to keep taking the medicine?
Well, the easing in part is more around the preparation phase. So easing in would be like, you know, understanding how to come up with the right protocol and treatment preparation for weaning off of the psychiatric medication, so to speak. Getting clear with your intention, starting a meditation practice, starting to rewire the dietary profile. So all these things are just leading into the best experience. And then once you've already prepped, then the integration part is just solidifying those seeds that were already planted.
Okay.
But in order to actually have a breakthrough experience, you don't necessarily microdose. Like if somebody came in full-blown addiction to opiates, you wouldn't start microdosing them on small amounts. You really need to have a breakthrough experience so that the whole psychic matrix and the whole neurochemistry has a massive reboot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to try it.
I know. Well, I'm just curious for those listeners and I myself, the minute that someone has their dose, what does this look like? What do people do after that? Do they just zone
Depends
out
what
in their
medicine
room, or
you're
are they?
taking, right?
Yeah, I guess. With
I was just
Ibogaine
going
or
to
something
say,
like
with
that.
a lot of these questions, it depends on which medicine, which
Sure.
clinic, which culture. So there's so many different ways to answer these things.
Yeah.
Are you asking about the Ibogaine
I
experience?
think, in specific, I was just curious what that looks like. The minute someone takes their dose, does something kick in immediately? What are they experiencing?
It takes about 40 minutes to 1.5 hours to
okay.
actually kick in. And we administer a tiny dose first to see if there's any allergic reactions and also to prepare the body to receive the medicine. And it starts slowly, generally with a sensation of warmth surrounding the body. And that's when patients feel the relief from the withdrawal.
Really?
It's immediate.
Wow.
What's going on there when they feel that warmth?
So, well, it's a very complex process. It affects about 50 different neuroreceptors. So it's not, you can't really tease apart like what a person's feeling from precise effect on a single transmitter system.
So it's at that point where they start feeling less of a desire to do these drugs and things.
Yeah.
The addiction starts to...
You kind of let go, but then, the actual visionary state experience starts, which is more of a waking dream state. So when you close your eyes, you have this very vivid imagination, and you have a thought, and that thought becomes a picture. And it's subtle at first, but then it starts building and building and building until you are in this fully immersive 3D experience that when you close your eyes, you're able to access your subconscious and go back and explore different areas of your life that you consider important. Some people go back to the moment of conception or watch the different stages of human evolution or
do a rebirthing thing.
Yeah.
People do that too.
This is fascinating. Do most folks find it to be a peaceful process when they're in it, or reflecting after, looking back? At the time, can it be a stressful thing for people?
It can be a stressful thing for people.
So what's important to know about Ibogaine is this is a very long journey, and this does separate it from many of the other sacred medicines on the planet. Ibogaine, again, it depends on who's administering it and the dose and the intention, but for us at Crossroads, you're looking at a 12 to 18-hour experience. So it starts at nighttime. You take a test dose followed by 2 or 3 more capsules depending on your body weight and your addiction type and what the doctors have decided for you. And then there's 4 phases of Ibogaine in total. There's 2 phases in that first night. So in that first phase, as Dr. Polanco is saying, it's a pretty intense visionary experience. So just to give you kind of an idea to answer your question, Kate, when the medicine starts to kick in, you'll feel this warmth take over your body. Yes, you might start to have auditory hallucinations. So you might hear buzzing in your ears, many sounds that are not there. For me, it was kind of like a jackhammer at some points. That's kind of hard to explain. You'll feel a tingling maybe coming over, a vibration of your whole body. And this is kind of the intense part of it, is the whole body starts to kind of vibrate. You might feel your consciousness just falling in space or rocking or spinning. And your body becomes ataxic. So you are laying in bed the entire experience. So for 12 to 18 hours, you are, hooked up to a heart monitor and a pulse, oximeter, and you will lay there all night, really not able to move much. If you move, you become very nauseous and start throwing up, and it feels like the whole world is coming up with you if you did try to sit. So you're laying in bed through the duration of the night, and you go on a journey through these visionary experiences. To me, it's like you're navigating the deepest parts of your psyche and really opening up mental files that you didn't even know were there. And then that can last for 6 to 8 hours as you go through this visionary experience. People often describe having some kind of life review. Like Martine says, starting at conception, people have even told stories of past lives, or seeing things maybe their ancestors have experienced as they speak about old times before they were on this planet. And then they'll see memories all the way through their childhood and up to the current point in their life. And it's amazing because some of these memories have obviously left a person unsettled. They will see little things or big things that they did not realize were impacting them, or maybe that there was some stored negative energy or emotion around those experiences. So it allows a person to relook at a past situation and make linkages between their psychological health now and that experience that happened when they were younger. So they're allowed to have some healing and re-narrate that experience. And then past the visionary phase, after 6 to 8 hours, it can depend, they'll move into more of an introspective stage in that same night where the visions might start to calm down or subdue just a little bit, and they can start to process everything that they just witnessed. So in the visionary stage, you can see just, so many images. They're coming at you so fast. It's kind of like frames of images that are flashing in your mind. It's really hard to make sense of all of it. And so then the second half of the night is an opportunity. You're still in treatment and sometimes very heavily, but you can start to choose where you want to navigate in your mind and what you want to look at, and start to make connections and breakthroughs and insights on what your human experience has been so far, and again, why things are the way they are.
So you can be more conscious and start choosing the sort of direction you want your life to go in terms of addiction and things.
It sure seems like that. In the beginning phases, it can just be so, I guess, of an automatic experience that's just happening to you. And in the later phases, you can start to think about what you've seen and choose what to focus on.
So is this all tapping in, is this like the subconscious? Is that what it's really getting into? Or it's actually deeper than that because you're going past lives and things, right?
Yeah, so on that spectrum of consciousness, I see it as both subconscious and superconscious.
Oh, right, okay.
So you're going into the subconscious material of the past life review and many of the traumatic experiences that are now going through a corrective experience.
Okay.
And you're tapping into the superconscious, which is your higher wisdom, your higher truth, your higher self, that higher directive, that connection between us as humans and source. Okay. Source, creator, God, the name of 1,000 names, however you choose to language it. So it's this both and full spectrum experience.
Wow. That's powerful because you're getting insight into your own subconscious, but then you're tapping into something much larger, which helps you to make changes and things. Wow.
Were you saying, Dr. Dan, on the show we did with you that is it Ibogaine specifically you've done over something crazy like 200 times? No, what have you? That was ayahuasca. Okay, I was like, with Ibogaine, how many times, so you have your single dose, you go through your process. Do people come back repeatedly again, like another year? Or is it kind of like once you're done, that was your experience?
Yeah, great question. In general, Ibogaine is, and again, it could depend. I don't know what it's like in Africa and how many times they do it, but in the Western world, it's typically a one-time thing, and that's because it's very expensive and it's scarce. It's not in abundance. We're kind of using it faster than it can grow. This is a shrub that takes 7 to 8 years to cultivate, and so the providers of Ibogaine are very specific in how they use it. And it's a very intense, long experience that most people do not want to revisit. So for most people, it is a one-time experience. I do see some providers or, medicinal healers in the field that have done it, like Dr. Dan says, to experiment and really understand the medicine more than once. And we have had patients that have come back for a second round down the road if they feel that it's necessary. But in general, this is a one-time thing for people.
Okay, so I was thinking if someone were to come back for more than one-time experience, you think about, gosh, how much more would there be to unpack? What different kinds of things could come up for people? Because I'm sure there's just so many levels of stuff pancaked in there. I'm sure if people were to do it more than once, they would have a different experience each time, if that were the case. Mm-hmm. Wow,
that's fascinating stuff. So I wanted to ask you too, is there any research that's being done right now with chronic degenerative diseases, not necessarily addictions, but like chronic issues like maybe diabetes or cancer or people that might have heart disease? Is there any research that's being done with psychedelics in these types of issues?
There is, and I haven't, because my focus has been so much on the psychiatric standpoint and the consciousness piece. I haven't really focused on the physiologic measures and the outcome data that's being studied right now. I know that there was just a great conference called IA 2014.
Gaia 2014?
Aya 2014, as in ayahuasca.
Okay.
AYA 2014.
Okay.
This was in Ibiza, Spain, and it was led by a company called ICEERS, the International Consortium for the Education of Entheogenic Research Sciences.
Wow.
Sciences or something like that.
That's a lot to say.
ICEERS.
Okay.
And ICEERS runs a databank of studies on both ayahuasca and Ibogaine.
Okay.
So that's one place to check out. Arrowid.org is another place to check out. Maps.org is another place to check out. Most of the studies, at least from the West and in the Americas, are on the psychiatric spectrum. Mm-hmm. And because these medicines are being really appreciated for a wide variety of other potential clinical uses, I know that there's some physiologic studies that are more directed towards whether it be endocrine recovery through diabetes or maybe even other things. I think there was actually some studies in regards to the physiologic benefit of ayahuasca for cancer.
Really?
Marijuana, obviously, you could put that in the category of entheogens and psychedelics. CBD has amazing studies that are out now for even stage 4 cancers and benefit and clinical benefit. So those are the ones that come up to my mind right now. And I think that's another area that we're going to continue to see some cross-collaboration between the psychiatric community and the general medical community about how these medicines are now coming on line, so to speak, to be used in a good way. And when you think too that everything's energy, everything starts at the subtle levels. So it starts in the subconscious fields, it starts in the psychological matrix, it starts in the energy body. I mean, these are terms that, like, just even 20 years ago, we would have thought were like voodoo, woo-woo, metaphysical, oh, you come from Sedona kind of language.
Totally.
Right? So, but, Reiki's even in many hospital settings now. Reiki's an energy medicine tool that insurance companies are starting to offer. Again, it's because it's a consumer-driven movement. It's not necessarily because it has a whole lot of, like, Western double-blind placebo-controlled trials. It's because it works. People find benefit, and they're going to find it whether you're offering it or somebody else. So if the medical industry is saying, well, let's keep as many patients under our umbrella as we can, let's start offering these treatments.
That would be good.
So if everything's energy, it starts on the subtle planes first, and then the body eventually expresses it. When we're talking about the psychedelic experience and entheogenic medicines and near-death experience and mystical experience, these are all very powerful, primarily energetic experiences, psychological experiences that naturally, when you resolve the issue at the core, the body's going to have this positive downstream effect for healing.
Just a ripple effect, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked to a lot of people about recall healing, Dr. Peter DeWitt and Gilbert Renaud and family constellation therapy and this type of stuff. That
awesome.
It, all these things have an emotional, spiritual, source, I think. And so it makes sense if you can tap into these places with these medicines that it would have a really good effect. Not saying it would cure cancer or anything like that, but it could be a first step in learning about how your body works and getting into that subconscious so that you can figure out. Because a lot of people with these types of diseases, we've had doctors on the show and they'll ask their patients, why do you think you have cancer? Or why do you think you have this disease? And they just don't know. But really, if you start digging a little deeper, there's always emotional traumas and things like that. So I'm hoping that it continues. This type of stuff just continues to grow, and people will get more interested in it. I hope the FDA doesn't crack down on it. I hope it continues to grow, and you guys are probably seeing lots of growth. Amazing. I'm sold. Are you sold, Kate? Move the mic.
I'm sold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to your other half of the team out in the living room when I went out to deal with our psycho dog.
Yeah.
But
she needs to be on ayahuasca.
She does need it. Can we bring her down to the Crossroads?
That'd be awesome.
Please? But I did mention to them, I said, it'd be so cool to come down and check out, experience what you guys do. And, I think, to be honest, most people listening, and I myself, it's a little scary. It kind of makes you, it makes you really uncomfortable thinking about it, but the effects and obviously the results, I believe, are 100% worth it. How do you make people feel more comfortable going into this kind of a situation?
I wouldn't recommend that you start off with Ibogaine because it is kind of
intense,
long lasting.
Yeah.
But the other medicine that we work with, which is the 5-MeO-DMT, that's only 10 minutes.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I've heard
And the
DMT
effects
is a lot
last up to
shorter.
30 minutes, but it's very short.
Okay.
Oh.
So it is intense as well, but manageable.
Interesting.
Good for people to know. Actually,
You know what I'm really excited about is what you were talking about in the last show is the float tanks and things like that. Do you think with some of these psychedelics, because I think what people think when they're first introduced to this world is that it's something that you can treat like a drug that you would smoke now, like marijuana, or something that you can just do recreationally. But I think it's important to know that these are very sacred, very serious things that need to be done in a controlled environment. It's not something that you would just haphazardly do these types of things. But it would be cool. Having said that, it would be really awesome if you could integrate this with something like a float tank.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I've got some really good friends. I won't name them on the air. And that's what they do.
Really?
Talk about the psychonautical research.
Oh, could you imagine? Have you ever done that?
Taking a really good psilocybin dose and floating for 3-4 hours and seeing what happens. And that's what Lilly did when he was developing the float tanks.
Yeah.
He would take massive amounts of ketamine and talk about going into like an altered state and into like really into the void and really surfing the psychic fields.
That'd be so amazing.
It's the opportunity that we have growing is more and more exciting around stacking these medicines and therapeutic interventions in a good way to have an ideal experience. Where it becomes alchemy is to know which person would be served with which psychedelic experience and which array of ancillary supportive treatments at a given time.
At a certain time, right.
Right, and then when we get really sophisticated in our assessment, our intervention, and again, I keep coming back to the integration piece.
Yes.
Because people do keep cycling through, again, not so much with Ibogaine, but particularly with ayahuasca, with peyote, maybe a little bit, with wachuma, maybe a little bit more, with marijuana, certainly, with psilocybin, definitely. People keep cycling through these experiences for a particular outcome. Sometimes it's recreational, and if it's recreational, fine. Ayahuasca is not a recreational drug medicine. Ibogaine is not a recreational medicine. These are such strong experiences. But some people do keep coming back to ceremony, particularly ayahuasca ceremony, because they're not getting their desired outcome. And mostly it's because they're not integrating what they just received and experienced in the ceremony.
Okay.
And integration takes time. It can take months, if not years, to fully integrate a major awakening experience.
And this is part of the work that you guys are doing at Crossroads, right? Integration and the coaching right afterwards.
So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the integration of that experience along with the recovery coaching to release the addictive lifestyle kind of tags and holds that has a person. And sometimes that means rewriting the complete social landscape. Like if I've been addicted to a particular substance and all my friends are related to that community, and now I go through an experience where my addictive neurochemistry is reset, I'm desiring to move further away from that, maintain and solidify my sobriety, then I'm probably not going to be hanging out with those same friends.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be hanging out at the same bars. I'm not going to be going to the same place. I may even want to move my place of residence. I may even want a new job. I may want a new life. Right? So there's so much that can unfold. And if we're, again, because you said these medicines are sacred. And as Deanna mentioned there too, they're also scarce. It's not like everybody's growing iboga on their, in their corner community garden lot.
Right.
It takes, they might be. They should be.
Yeah.
Right? And the interesting thing about that is that it's particularly with iboga, it has such a wide growth range. So does wachuma or San Pedro cactus. I mean, you can go to the nursery and find San Pedro cactus.
Yeah, we've seen those. Can people grow iboga here?
It grows wherever coffee grows.
Oh, okay. So same kind of climate, temperament. Wow.
Yeah. So in order to really appreciate the sacrament, them as a religious experience and a tool to really be honored and revered, then let's maximize the benefit so that we can have a sustainable usage source. We don't stress the demand further than, stress the supply further than the demand. And so that's where it's really important, not only just to look at sustainable supply chains, but also to reap the maximal benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So to really be able to integrate well. And sometimes that means finding a coach or a mentor that can help that process along, dedicating oneself to the lifestyle measures that also are supportive. And you guys know many of the experts in the field around extreme health. And it's only extreme health because we're so far away from the natural healing modalities.
Yeah.
This is like our version of extreme health is actually old medicine.
Just normal.
It's just getting resurrected.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does it mean to eat well, live well, sleep well, have stress management, remember how to play well, remember how to live in conscious communities and with freedom in our body, joy in our hearts, and inspiration in our minds.
That just should be the normal default state. Not these addictions and things like that, because you're so plugged into some kind of weird world that has you doing all this work that you don't want to do, and this whole pattern of subconscious programming and stuff.
Right. So I get super excited about something like flotation therapy because most people can do that.
Yeah.
And most people have that available. And you can do that sustainably.
We go to a place up the street. It's not just it's about 20 minutes away in Newport Beach. And they have the float tanks what's the name of the guy? The main guy that makes the float tanks.
Crash.
Yeah, up in LA.
In LA.
Yeah, you know him?
Yeah, Crash. Talk about a caricature. He is a funny dude. And he's been doing it, man. I floated in Crash's lab about maybe 3 months ago. And I was in one of the tanks. He has 2 tanks right there. They're Samadhi tanks. And he's opening up a larger 8 tank center.
I've heard about that.
Relatively soon. So the 2-tank center that's right there on the Venice Boardwalk, that's just going to be the research facility. So right now that's what's open. They have he has like a 4 to 6 week waiting list. And one of the reasons is because he offers 2-hour floats, and he offers them only for like $40 or $60. It's super reasonably priced. And it's because he wants everybody to float.
Yeah.
And so this guy he's been doing it right. And the tank that I floated in had been used every day, had been floated in every day for 13 years straight.
No way.
Right.
Wow. That's good. I mean, that shows you people are waking up and people are wanting to try these weird kind of things.
Well, do you remember when we called up there over a year ago before our friend Ron opened up his crash tanks or whatever? But do you remember it was like he was booked out for months?
Yeah, months.
Like months. It's so cool. People are really waking up to this stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that people are that turned on to it, just because it works. And when you look at, again, side effect profile, has extraordinary benefit, very little risk. You can take it if you're on medication, if you're overweight, if you have any kind of chronic disease, whatever it is. And also, again, it addresses the 4 primary reasons that people go see their primary care physician.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Pain, stress, weight management, and to get off of medications.
Yeah.
It helps with all of those things.
It's amazing.
I've heard some amazing healings that people have gone and back and had that like life inventory, like something that would happen in an Ibogaine session, go back and relive trauma, re-experience it fully, but in order to heal it. So this guy had, like a L2, 3, 4 lumbar fusion after chronic pain. When he got blown, quote unquote, I got blown up twice in Iraq. And so he had this chronic pain, was on 4 different opiates, started floating 3 times a week for 2 months, and by the end of the 2 months was off his pain meds.
Wow.
Yeah. And the first time he floated, he went and relived that time where he got blown up. He said it was the best thing and the worst thing that ever happened. He came out kind of shaken, like, sometimes people come out kind of shaken from an Ibogaine therapy. And then he, the first thing he did when he got out of the tank is he went and signed up for another session. Because he's like, this stuff works. This is getting me deeper than anything else. And after doing it and stacking the therapies and having the additive benefit, at the end of 2 months, he was off of 4 different chronic, significant opiate medications.
That's so right? Awesome. What a story.
Wow. And he probably didn't re-enlist in the military at that point.
Maybe not.
I doubt it.
So just in wrapping up here, I just want to make sure that we get everybody's websites said. So Dr. Dan, how about you go first? Because you have a few different websites, right?
Yeah, masteringmedicine.com. Also, On It Labs, as I'm working in consultation with them. The Temple of the Way of Light is another place that I'm working in consultation with. That's an ayahuasca center. Crossroads has just invited me to come on as medical director there.
Awesome.
So there's a few different centers where we're all doing similar kind of work from our own kind of angle of it.
And so do you have a place like on Facebook or social media where people can follow your updates or anything like that?
I've been asked that question recently, and I am so not into the social media kind of framework per se. I've been hunkered down in my own cocoon, doing my own work in Sedona. Now I'm kind of coming out, so to speak. And some really good key friends and strategic partners recently have been asking me those same questions. So I think it's quite likely that in the very near future that'll happen.
Okay, cool. We'll put a link to that on this show page.
Okay.
I know, right? It's gone old school. I don't even have a cell phone, so it's like I don't like.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. This invasive, this technology, kind of don't like it too much.
Yeah.
And you guys and Deanna, and your website is beingtruetoyou.com, right?
Yep. So for information on recovery coaching and integration, after these experiences, you can go to beingtruetoyou.com. So all spelt out.
And what kind of stuff is on there for people?
Well, there'll be some information about addiction and recovery and that process of recovery. It'll talk a little bit about the coaches. You'll be able to see a whole list of coaches that are involved with us, and just a little bit about integration.
Nice.
And then it'll be a way to connect with us. Will be the best way to get information.
Awesome. And Dr. Polanco
Website is crossroadsibogaine.com.
crossroadsibogaine.com. It's IBOGAINE, right? crossroadsibogaine.com. And so if someone wants to visit you and they have some addictions, they're listening to this, what would be the first thing they'd want to do?
Well, the first step would be to inform themselves about Ibogaine and to go to the website, read about the treatment, and then get in touch with us.
Okay, and then they would contact you, and then you would go through a process with them and bringing them down?
Correct, yeah. So we don't treat everybody that applies. So we have to screen and make sure that they're good candidates first.
Okay, awesome. Man, this has been fun. I'm so, this whole side and piece, of health and wellness, I think it's something that is not really talked about a lot because a lot of people are focusing on supplements and minerals, nutrition, cleansing, detox. There's all kinds of fitness. There are all kinds of different ways of looking at healing, but I think this is something that is growing a lot, and I think it's awesome that you guys are all a part of doing this and bringing more awareness to people. I think it's just I'm so excited for the possibilities of the future, and hoping this clinics like your Crossroads and Temple the Way of Light, and I just hope that they stay around and they're available for people because there's so much powerful healing.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. All right, so this was episode 3. Let me see, get this right. Is it 373? Okay, 373. So we'll put links to everything. You also have masteryinmedicine.com too, right? And the rpinstitute.com?
Yeah, that's a center that I run with some of my good friends, Morgan and Puma. And that's a detoxification-based center. Again, so we were talking about what's the data with psychedelics and chronic disease. That's growing. What we do know is cleansing and detoxification is great for chronic disease. So that's our center outside of Sedona, where people come for a variety of cleansing retreats.
Is that different than Grace Grove, or is that the same one?
Grace Grove is the site for the RP Institute. So they're pretty much they're pretty much one and the same.
Okay, so RP Institute is Grace Grove, but Grace Grove is just the place.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Master of Medicine, man. On it, all kinds of This is good stuff. I'm stoked. This is a lot of fun. All right, so this was episode 373. We appreciate you guys listening and being a part of everything. Wow, hour 45 minutes. That just went by fast. We didn't even take a break too. We're going to take commercials, but it was too good. So this was episode 373.